and welcome to Mysterious Events. I'm your host, Stephen A. McKay, a writer and podcaster with a lifelong interest in the strange and unexplained. Thank you for joining me today for this first ever episode. Since it is the first episode, I know it has to be a good one, or people won't tune in for more. So with that in mind, I decided to kick things off with a true crime case that's intrigued me for a few years now. And that is the mysterious death of Cindy James. I'm not going to get into all the tiny details of the case. That's not what this podcast is about. I really just want to take a look at some of the more bizarre elements leading up to her disappearance and the questions that the authorities were left with when she was eventually found. Cindy James was a paediatric nurse who lived in Canada, went missing on May 25th, 1989, and she'd had a lot of troubles in the years prior to her disappearance. As far back as 1982, she'd called police to report being stalked, and for the next 7 years these reports escalated, growing ever stranger. Before this, she had been married to a psychiatrist called Roy Makepeace for a few years, but the pair had separated, with Cindy claiming spousal abuse. For his part, Makepeace, who was 18 years older than her, said he'd only slapped her twice, as if that was alright. So she'd left him and moved away to live on her own. 4 months after the separation, however, Cindy's troubles really began. Between late 1982 and 1989, she made 90 reports to the police of stalking, vandalism, arson, harassment, intimidation, home invasions, and physical assaults. The strange thing about all these reports, though, was the fact Cindy could never tell investigators who the perpetrators were, although some believed she knew exactly who was behind them but couldn't tell anyone. It all started with creepy phone calls. Sometimes the caller would speak in different voices, sometimes it would just be silence, sometimes there would be sexual and violent threats. She told her friends and family that she thought someone had been prowling around her house about this time, which would be terrifying enough, especially for a woman living by herself. But then she got a phone call from a man telling her, "I'll get you soon, Cindy." She called the police, but as soon as they left, she got another call saying, "You f***ing bitch, I'll get you." Things just get worse from there, with Cindy reporting that someone had smashed her porch lights, thrown a rock through her window, and even broke into her house and slashed her pillow. I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been for her. Just picture that, coming home from work to find someone had actually been inside your house, your bedroom, and attacked your pillow with a knife. Holy shit. One of the policemen investigating the case believed it was Cindy's estranged husband, Roy Makepeace, who was behind it all. For her part, she didn't seem too sure, sometimes telling people she didn't think he could act like that, but telling others that he'd been violent and abusive during their marriage. She had some lodgers living in the basement of her house during this time, and they reported hearing someone moving about upstairs when Cindy was away at work, lending credence to her claims. A neighbour also told the police he'd seen a man who did not look like Roy Makepeace hanging around outside Cindy's house on 3 different occasions, and even coming into her garden once. Now, these reports are pretty huge in my opinion, because, you see, some people have come to the conclusion that Cindy James made everything up. They say that there was never any stalker, and anything that happened, like her pillow being slashed, or her porch lights being damaged, was done by Cindy herself. Why the hell would anyone do that, you might ask? But there have been quite a few cases of people literally stalking themselves over the years. Sometimes these people genuinely don't seem to know they're even doing it. It sounds unbelievable, but it has happened. However, if Cindy was doing it all to herself, who was moving about in her house when she was out at work? Who was the man her neighbour saw outside? The police officer who was in charge of the case was called Patrick McBride, and just to make the story even more bizarre than it already was, Officer McBride started a relationship and moved in with Cindy shortly after the stalking began, like the same month. He'd separated from his wife and apparently suggested to Cindy he move in with her for a couple of weeks to keep an eye on things. I'm not sure how his superiors down at the police station saw this, but it seems batshit crazy to me. Anyway, in yet another twist, Officer McBride found Cindy's estranged husband Roy Makepeace lurking outside the house in his car. Apparently Makepeace claimed he was trying to catch Cindy's stalker. I mean, I think you can probably see why this case intrigues me so much. It's just bizarre. Cindy apparently remained friendly with Roy Makepeace, and he would sometimes visit the house to discuss his stalking with Officer McBride. McBride moved out of the house around Christmas, but the events continued, with Cindy's phone lines being cut and graphic images of corpses being stuck to her car windshield. Again, adding credence to her claims was the fact both McBride and Makepeace believed her. They were close to her, knew her very well, spent a lot of time at the house with her, and they did not think she was making things up or doing it to herself. A month after McBride moved out, one of Cindy's friends visited and found her lying in her garden, unconscious, with a nylon stocking wrapped tightly around her neck. When she came to, Cindy said a man had attacked her from behind, dragged her into her garage where a second man had joined the first, and both had sexually assaulted her. He told her they'd kill her younger sister if she reported the attack, and doctors apparently couldn't find concrete evidence of sexual assault. I think at this point the authorities might have started to question if any of her claims were real, as they recommended Cindy visit a psychiatrist, although she refused. Moving into 1983, she moved house to try and escape the stalker, but disturbing notes continued to be sent to her, even after she moved again. Things like, "Run rabbit run, I'll show you how fucking good I am. Soon, bang bang, you're dead." And after a trip paid for by her estranged husband, who apparently wanted to get back with her, "Welcome back, death, blood, hate, etc." She tried painting her car and hired a private investigator named Ozzy Caban. She paid for this guy to help her for the next 6 years, and he reported that Cindy took lots of precautions, like wearing a panic button and carrying pepper spray. I mean, if she was really doing all this to herself, she was really going out of her way to make it seem genuine. I don't know how much a private investigator costs over 6 years, but I imagine it's not cheap, especially for someone on a nurse's salary. And things just continued. Scary phone calls, disturbing notes. She found dead cats in her yard bound up with rope, and wrote in her diary that she thought Roy Makepeace had destroyed her garden. What made her think that? I'd love to know, especially since she seemed to have remained quite cordial with him after their separation. Then the investigator, Ozzy, heard weird noises on a two-way radio, a walkie-talkie, that he'd given Cindy, so he hurried over to check on her. He found her unconscious in her house, with a knife stabbed through her hand, and a note attached to it saying, "Now you must die, cunt." When she regained consciousness, she said a man had come into her garden and assaulted her, but, again, she doesn't seem to have known who he was, or at least didn't tell the police who he was. She supposedly woke up at one point during the assault and saw him sticking a hypodermic needle into her arm. Doctors did find a needle mark, but no evidence of drugs in her system. Really, it's all very conflicting, and you can kinda see why the cops made her take a lie detector test over this report. It probably won't surprise you to know the results were inconclusive. At this point, Cindy started to suggest it was Roy Makepeace that was behind everything, and the police questioned him extensively. Makepeace told him he had nothing to do with it, and he believed it was all down to the mafia. As if it wasn't strange enough already. Whoever was doing it was not deterred by the police investigation as things grew worse. Ozzy Caban was phoned by her one night, and he rushed over to find her terrified, in her garden, claiming someone had got into her house. Caban found Cindy's dog in the basement, petrified, clearly having been physically abused, and bound with rope that appeared the same as what had been tied round the dead cats found in the garden previously. Just to add to the horror, There were sexually explicit photos strewn about the basement and a note saying, "Happy birthday." It would have been Cindy's birthday a few days before this. Happy birthday! God, I can think of nicer ways to celebrate. Like Officer McBride and Roy Makepeace before, Ozzy Caban didn't believe Cindy had been the one behind these events, because he simply couldn't see her harming her own dog like that. Cindy's mother, Tilly, stayed the night with her in July 1984 and was awakened during the night by the dog barking. She found Cindy checking the doors and windows were locked, and then both of them heard the doorbell ring. No one was there, but a window at the porch had been damaged. Now again, mark that, Cindy's mother heard the doorbell ring while Cindy was with her. That must mean someone else was doing it, right? This is 1984, there was only one way to ring a bell back then, and it was to press the one at the front door. 2 weeks after that, she claimed she'd been violently assaulted again, this time while out walking her dog. At this point, I'm feeling heart sorry for that dog, the poor thing. This time it was apparently a man with a beard driving a green van, and he had a female with him. Cindy was found afterwards wandering around near a neighbour's house with a nylon stocking around her neck. A nylon stocking, just like before. At the hospital, doctors found 2 puncture marks on her arm, and while she was there, a man called the receptionist and asked about the hospital's security policies. The receptionist later told police that after hearing Roy Makepeace's voice, there was a good possibility it had been him who'd phoned. Look, it could have been a completely unconnected phone call made by some random guy, but it's weird, isn't it? Like so many things in this case, it's just plain weird. And guess what? It's about to get even weirder. The next year, with the harassment ongoing, Cindy was hypnotised and told police that she'd been on a holiday a few years previously with her husband Roy. Roy had apparently murdered 2 people, dismembered them with an axe, and actually smeared the blood from a severed limb across Cindy's face. However, Cindy's sister had actually been on this holiday with them, and it might not surprise you to know that she could not remember anything like this happening. Apparently she thought it was an alright holiday. I went to a hypnotist once to help me break a habit. I can't even remember what it was, smoking or anxiety or something, but I remember it didn't work at all with me. I'm apparently the kind of person that can't be hypnotised. But some people do get put pretty deeply under, and as well as being made to do hilarious things like pretend they're a chicken, they remember bizarre things happening to them, like being abducted by aliens. Personally, I don't place much stock in such memories. They might not be completely fabricated, but I don't believe they're 100% true or accurate either. How real was Cindy's memory of seeing Roy Makepeace murder 2 people? Well, police investigated. They couldn't find any missing people or any truth to the strange claims. This is an aspect of the whole case that I think needs to be pointed out. The police did take Cindy's reports and claims seriously. They did investigate, they did try to help her, and in fact the investigation cost, in total, something like 1.5 million Canadian dollars. 1.5 million. But they were never able to find any real evidence of anything being done to her by some outside party. She does seem to have completely believed she was telling the truth though, and attempted suicide in 1985. This is a bizarre case, but at its heart is the suffering of this poor woman, and you can't help feeling desperately sorry for her. The ordeal wasn't over though, as things continued to happen. Packages with putrefied meat were sent to her along with nylon stockings, nasty phone calls were made, and fires broke out inside her home. Inside. Investigating the latest fire, a detective said he thought it had been started by Cindy herself. Other investigators had started to say the same kind of thing, suggesting that the male detectives on the case were being fooled by a pretty woman. She was evaluated by a psychologist again, and they found that Cindy may have been suffering dissociative identity disorder, also known back then especially, as multiple personality disorder as a result of a traumatic event in her childhood. Now that could explain why Cindy believed she was being harassed, even if she was actually doing it to herself. One personality could be doing the bad stuff, while the Cindy personality was unaware of it. That seems logical, and it could explain some things, maybe most of it, but not all of it. Not the doorbell ringing when Cindy was with her mum inside the house, or the neighbours seeing that man lurking about the place. Trying once more to escape her tormentor, Cindy moved house again. And again, it didn't help, and she was found in December beside a road, unconscious, with a nylon stocking wrapped tightly around her neck, again. She was also wearing, bizarrely, men's work boots that were too big for her, and a single glove. Weird things like that make this case so just weird and fascinating. Men's work boots and a single glove. Suffering hypothermia along with cuts and bruising, she was taken to hospital where they suspected she'd been injected with a sedative. Cindy, probably infuriatingly for police, claimed she couldn't remember what had happened, saying she'd left work to go for lunch, couldn't remember anything afterwards. Moving into 1986, two of her friends, a couple named Agnes and Tom, would sometimes spend the night at her house just to make her feel safer. Honestly, I don't know how she could live on her own with all this shit going down. I'd have moved in with my parents if I was her. Anyway, one night when these friends were staying with Cindy, yet another fire seemed to start on its own within the basement. When they tried to phone the fire brigade, they discovered the phone lines had been cut. Tom ran out to use a neighbour's phone and saw a man standing outside watching Cindy's house. When Tom approached him, the man ran off. Again, we have an independent witness seeing a man at the house when bad stuff was happening. Coincidence? Maybe. Why did he run away though? Why was he even there watching the house in the night? It really does add credence to Cindy's claims, don't you think? At this point, and unsurprisingly, Cindy retreated into herself, and a psychiatrist thought she was suicidal, so he had her sent to a hospital. She eventually began to feel better and was released after a 10-week stay. At this point, she admitted to her father that she actually knew who her stalker was and had been hiding the fact from everyone. Without telling police who the perpetrator was, things continued as they had been, with windows being smashed at Cindy's house, windows being cut with a glass cutter, someone apparently entering the house, and then her ex-husband Roy Makepeace received 2 phone messages. I actually have the audio from one of those calls, and I'm warning you now, it's frankly terrifying. There's just something incredibly creepy about it. Take a listen, see what you make of it. Does anything jump out at you from hearing the audio though? Because to me, that's a woman's voice, not a man. It's harsh, guttural, and probably supposed to sound like a man. But in my opinion, that's a woman. Listen again. If it is a woman, could it be Cindy? Did she leave the message for Roy? Why? Like everything else in this case, it just throws up more questions and leaves you wondering, what the fuck? I can see why people who believe Cindy was doing all this to herself use this phone message as proof to back up their opinion. It would be interesting to know what Roy thought of the message. I haven't found anything about that. But you'd think he would recognise her voice and tell people. So I assume he never. So was it a different woman? Somebody Cindy asked to do it for her? I mean, it's just so strange. After this, she was found unconscious again in her garage. This time she was hog-tied, nude from the waist down, and you can probably guess what was tied around her neck. Yep, nylon stocking. An expert in knots, a mountaineer, was asked to view these nylon stockings and, in his opinion, it was highly unlikely that she could have tied those knots by herself. The police continued to investigate when Cindy made more reports of break-ins, but they were never able to catch anyone. On May 25th, 1989, Cindy cashed her paycheck and went shopping. She was supposed to be home later as her friends from earlier, Agnes and Tom, were staying the night. When she never arrived, they went out looking for her. They found her car abandoned and called police. When the car was examined, blood was found along with groceries, a gift for a friend's son, and the contents of her wallet were strewn about underneath the car. Of Cindy, there was no sign, and the police couldn't find her. Several days later, with Cindy still missing, a lodger who'd been living with Cindy received a phone call from a man claiming to be her father and asking about her life insurance policy. When questioned, Cindy's father, of course, said it hadn't been him on the phone. Of course it hadn't. So who the hell was it? About 2 weeks after she went missing, a construction worker found Cindy's dead body in the back garden of an abandoned house. She was hog-tied, with a nylon stocking around her neck. Someone had spray painted in orange letters, "Some bitch died here," on a nearby fuel tank, and a line led from the graffiti to encircle the place where Cindy's body was found. A pinprick, like one from a hypodermic needle, was found in her arm, and a pathologist thought she'd been lying there for around 6 days. Now, once more, things get really strange. She'd died from ingesting drugs. The doctors found that she'd swallowed, between 20 and 80 flurazepam tablets, and numerous diazepam tablets. Just think about that for a moment. Can you imagine swallowing that many tablets? How long would it take? I struggled to swallow a couple of paracetamol, never mind dozens, in one go. And there was also morphine in her system. It might have been injected, but the doctors couldn't be sure of that, proclaiming themselves baffled. If she had been injected with the morphine, she'd have fallen unconscious within minutes, which makes one wonder how the hell she managed to hog-tie herself and swallow all those tablets. It should be noted that, as far as I know, no drink was found beside the body, so she'd have had to swallow all that without anything to help wash it down. Come on, really? There was also no syringe found that she could have used to inject herself with the morphine. The private investigator, Ozzy Caban, visited her in the morgue and noted lividity, the settling of blood post-mortem, on her left side. Cindy had been found lying on her right side though, suggesting she'd died elsewhere and been moved to the abandoned house. Despite all this, the police decided she committed suicide, and the tabloids began reporting as much, rather to her family's dismay. Her ex-husband Roy did not attend her funeral. There was an inquest after Cindy's death, and more strange evidence was uncovered. Apparently, her parents had discovered a ton of drugs at her house, including sedatives and antipsychotic drugs her psychiatrists had prescribed but she'd not been taking. Her sister, Melanie, had also discovered a glass cutter in Cindy's purse, and a syringe kit. The psychiatrists that had been treating Cindy for all those years seemed to agree that she suffered from some kind of multiple personality disorder, perhaps triggered by PTSD as a result of her father abusing her as a child. Maybe that's why she never moved in with her parents. Another not expert was brought in, and he was able to show that Cindy could have tied herself up within 3 minutes before the sedatives took effect and killed her. At the end of it, the inquest could not say whether Cindy had been murdered or committed suicide, and in the end said she died by unknown event. Whoa, what an insane story, eh? There's definitely points for both sides of the case. Did she do it all to herself for attention or some other reason? Or was some man or men stalking her? She continued to walk her dog even after being attacked, and even sometimes in the middle of the night. Would you do that if all this was going on? I know I wouldn't, even if I had a Rottweiler. I'd just send him out himself and watch from behind the window. You're on your own, Fido. Then there's the fact the police staked out her house multiple times but never saw anyone there. Never collected any conclusive evidence. She also continued to live in houses alone, when her friends and family suggested she move into an apartment where other people would be close by. And if she was murdered, why would the murderer choose such a bizarre method, forcing her to swallow dozens and dozens of tablets? I've read that when they found her body she had no shoes or socks on, but the soles of her feet were clean. If she'd walked there herself, her feet would have been dirty, right? But that seems to be a myth, as Ozzy Caban said she was found with shoes, although it looked like they'd just been polished rather than lying out in the elements for days. Then again, Caban was apparently the guy the clean feet story came from, so who knows? Ultimately, no one can say for sure what happened to Cindy James. It's a really strange and sad story, whatever the truth. If you don't already know, I'm actually a historical fiction author, and this case intrigued me so much that I wrote a medieval mystery novella based on it. In my story, Faces of Darkness, there's a happy ending though, as the bailiff figures out what's going on. Cindy's story didn't end happily, but hopefully she's now at peace and her suffering is over. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the case, I can recommend the Trail Went Cold's episode on it, and the Audible podcast Death by Unknown Event. Both links are in the show notes. If you have any thoughts yourself on what happened, please let me know. Going forward, I probably won't cover too many true crime cases on mysterious events. I find them too depressing. But I've always been fascinated with this story and thought it would be a good first episode. Hopefully you found it as intriguing as I do, and you'll join me for episode 2. In the meantime, if you'd like to hear more from me, check out Rock Paper Swords, the historical action and adventure podcast, which I co-host with Matthew Harvey. Again, link in the show notes. Cheers all, and until next time, seek the mysteries. Going forward, I probably won't cover too many true crime cases on Mystery Event.